Well, without any further ado, I will introduce Mr. Robert Obma. He is a graduate of University of North Dakota, private fixed wing and helicopter pilot, as well as a controller in Indianapolis. And for your appreciation, we'd like to give you this certificate that was here. So we'll give you one.
It's beautiful.
Yeah, it is fantastic. Oh,
Hey, there it is.
here it is. See, I'm not lying.
All right, there
Thanks,
we go.
Ruth.
Thank you very much. They said my name is Robert Obma. I'm a controller at Indianapolis Center, and with me, my cohorts up here. This is Richard Kennington from the Portland Tower in Oregon, not Maine. Right here, Ron Schusterman out of Boston Tracon, and Amanda Hodge out of Oakland Center. And without further ado, I'll kind of let Richard start us out here, and we'll get. Oh, Ron's going to start us out.
All right, how do I advance it? There we go. All right, good afternoon, everyone. We'll be talking about getting the full picture, how ATC works for you. As you leave today, don't forget to pick up a complete set of our pilot control communications cards. We'll be handing them out in front. Pilot control communications, our first topic, vital to the safe, orderly, and expeditious flow of air traffic. Obtaining a clearance from the tower. You want to make sure you have the current ATIS and weather. Let the controller know you have the current ATIS and weather. If you're getting close to the top of the hour, make sure that the time corresponds to that top of the hour. Have that weather and ATIS ready for you, ready for the controller. Who are you? State your full call sign, destination, verify you have the ATIS. Be prepared to copy a route if it's different than what you filed, especially in the Northeast. Read back the clearance in the same order it's received. So if you have any questions on any of the VORs or the intersections, don't hesitate to ask. We can spell everything out for you. We use those VORs and intersections all the time, and you might not be familiar. Departure and ATC positions. We have clearance delivery, ground, tower, departure. For ground control, state the call sign in your position with ready to taxi. Have your taxi chart ready for the airport to assist you when receiving detailed instructions. If you do need progressives, don't hesitate to ask if you're unfamiliar. We don't mind telling you exactly where to go, and we know exactly what you're going to be doing. Read back runway assignment and hold short instructions with your call sign. And that call sign is very important. You can't just say Roger Wilco. If you become lost or unsure, stop and ask, if not on the runway. For en route operations, when you dial in a new frequency, listen before transmitting so you don't step on any other pilots. Get a feel for what's occurring on the frequency. Upon initial check-in, controllers are expecting you to give your full call sign, current altitude, and the altitude you are climbing or descending to. And controllers typically work airspace using multiple frequencies up to 14 at once. The reason why that number is so high is because a lot of our VHF frequencies have UHF backups that we use as well. So you might be working 7 to 8 frequencies and have several UHF frequencies on the other side of it. You may not always hear the controller or the pilot's response because they're working multiple frequencies, especially when times are slow and they're combining positions. And there may be other situations taking place, emergencies, weather deviations, etc., on one of the other frequencies. While you're airborne, the pilot should know what to say prior to keying the microphone. Facility you are calling, aircraft identification, aircraft type and current position, including altitude. Your request, flight following, request transition airspace, etc. And if you have a lot of information to give, listen to the controller, listen to what's occurring on the frequency, wait a few seconds, wait for a time when you feel there's a good opening to interject, and just state your call sign. Boston approach, this is Cessna 123. We'll call you back as soon as we can. I'm sorry. We'll call you back. As soon as you say your call sign, we'll call you right back, and you can tell us all the information. about what you want to do, where you want to go.
So how many here, who has gotten VFR flight following before? Anyone? Okay, perfect, right? So I will tell you from the en route side of things, one thing that I would say maybe is a pet peeve for us is when you check on for VFR flight following and you give all of your information up front. Because you have to understand, as a controller, if you check on with your call sign and we haven't been working you, we don't know who you are. So the first thing I'm looking on my radar scope is, who is this and where are they? And while you're saying all that extra stuff, I'm not listening because I'm looking at where you are. So normally what will happen is if you call on, say, Indy Center, November 1234, request, and I'll say, and I'll punch on my little keyboard, I'll put code, November 1234, and it will give me a transponder code to give you. And then I'll say November 1234, squawk 2215 and ident. You'll squawk that and ident. Then I'll say November 1234, radar contact 5 miles north of the Fargo VOR, say request. And then that's when we would prefer to go, okay, yep, we are Cessna 172 slant golf. We'd like VFR flight following to Grand Forks International Airport. And then I'm ready to type all that into the system. But if you say all that from the get-go, 9 times out of 10, I'm going to have to ask you to repeat it because I didn't catch it. Because since I don't know who you are, I'm fixated on trying to figure out who you are. So that usually works best if you just call on with your call sign and request. And that way I can first radar identify you, and then we can move on to what the request is. Does that make sense? What if you do not have a transponder? So then we would use a primary target. And so I would radar identify you via primary radar system, which would more than likely be turns. I'd probably give you a 30 degree left or right turn, and then radar identify you via primary target. Yes, correct. But make sure, but the thing is with that though, is if they say come back, because they're going to come back, the first thing they're going to do is say November 1234 squawk 0235, and you just say center November 1234. We don't have a transponder. You know, we're primary only. You wouldn't know what primary, but you'd say we don't have a transponder.
Yeah.
And then, but I'm still going to have to type you in the system. So at that point, you're still in the system now. I've entered your call sign into the NAS, the National Airspace System, but I won't track you via transponder. I'll track you via other means.
And if you give us your position relative in airport or VOR, if you have an idea, I can at least identify you that way without turning you in any direction.
Correct.
Yes.
Because understand that our mind is looking for who we're talking to. So if you come out of nowhere and you're new, it kind of stops us dead in our tracks, and we're like, who? What? Like, we have to kind of go from there, and that's why. Yeah, don't sneak up on me like that. Well, it would entirely depend on what kind of airspace you're in. Are you approaching Bravo or the Charlie? That's a really difficult question to answer. Delta? That's a little bit further out. I'd probably prefer about 10 miles out.
Yeah.
But remember this. I hate to be judgmental, but I really am. Okay? I am making judgments from the first minute you call me. So the more ums and ands you include, the less likely you are to get good traffic, good service when I'm busy. All right? You might get put off to the side. You sound confident, like he said here. Know what you're going to say before you key up that mic, right? Because I'm making a lot of judgments. I mean, look at him. He looks like Lex Luthor. I mean, he makes lots of judgments.
And also that initial call, you'll just say, approach November 123, and just wait for a response. If you say, approach November 123 with you, now we think you've been handed off and someone else worked you. We start looking for you. We can't find you. We're going to start asking questions of what's going on. Okay. Next item is arrival procedures to the tower. Contact the tower when advised by the radar controller. So if you're VFR inbound to a controlled tower, if the tower doesn't exist and it's just a Delta airspace tower, usually the control will terminate service with you, ship you over to the tower. It's your responsibility to get the ATIS. If it's a airport tower that's controlled with a Charlie, they'll keep you because they're responsible for sequencing, or Bravo for that matter. Normally call sign distance and runway assignment is sufficient. If not talking to radar controller, contact the tower at least 10 miles or before entering the controlled airspace from the airport. Give them a chance to identify you, figure out where you are, adjust their sequence, and plan for their sequence for your arrival. And obviously your type aircraft is important too. You might be a number 2, depending on type, or number 1, depending on type, if they can sneak you in. Acknowledge all instructions and pay particular attention to wake turbulence advisories. Try and, if they point out an aircraft that you're following, there might be wake turbulence involved. Try and visually see the aircraft and adjust your descent rate based on that aircraft's descent rate.
So and I'll tell you this. So if you were at our presentation earlier this morning, you've already heard the story, and I apologize. You may want to go outside and watch the airplanes for a couple minutes. But so like I said before, I'm a private pilot. I learned at North Dakota, relatively busy airport with GA, but not a lot of airlines, maybe 4 or 5 flights a day. So I'm going to do my first solo, and I'm really excited, right? I go do my first touch and go. I go do my second touch and go. And at this point, I'm feeling really confident about life. I'm thinking about asking that girl out that I've always wanted to ask out. I'm going to go to Canada because you can drink at 18 up there the next day. I'm thinking about all the good things in my life. And so I'm on the downwind. I'm ready to land. And the tower called, said, Sioux, at the time, North Dakota, we were the Fighting Sioux. So it said, Sioux 24, make a left 180. We have a wind change. Traffic to follow now is on a 5-mile final. It's a DC-9. And I'm thinking, my last landing, I'm going to go, nose to tail with a DC-9. I'm going to follow him in, and it's just the best day of my life. So I'm on the downwind. I go, Grand Forks Tower, DC-9's in sight. And they go, Sioux 24, caution wake turbulence, base your discretion, clear to land. I go, or clear for the option. I go, got him in sight, and I'll let you know. And so I see the DC-9 pass by, and I'm like, I got to get a closer look. I love planes. So I turn base, and I'm still really close, and I turn a really tight final because I really want to look and watch this DC-9 land. I want to come in right behind him and feel all confident. So we're coming in, and I feel a little shudder. I'm like, oh, what was that? Another little shudder, and the next thing I'm upside down. And then I go right back up. And I do that, for about 5 seconds, back and forth, back and forth. And my instructor, who's in the tower, goes, Bob, are you okay? And I go, Grand Forks Tower, this will be a full stop landing for Sioux 24. And I land, luckily, and I taxi off, and I almost had to leave and go to the back. I was shaking, But the story of that is, if you are uncomfortable with a wake turbulence situation and don't make my mistake, let the tower know. So if they say, caution wake turbulence, clear to land, turn base, and you're not ready, say, tower, can we extend our downwind for wake turbulence, whatever the case may be. But it's, safety is number one, and make sure that you keep that in mind, especially if you're given the option to turn base your discretion to follow for wake turbulence. Just watch out for that. It is actually very dangerous, wake turbulence, and don't be me, because it's really embarrassing too, because everyone saw it and it was quite the talk of the airport for a while. But just keep that in mind when you're dealing with wake turbulence, especially if you think that maybe we're a little close. We're turning you base a little close. Ask, say, can we extend our downwind for wake turbulence? 9 times out of 10, we're going to comply with that.
And if a controller tells you they'll caution wake turbulence, you're following DC-9 traffic, 2-mile final. If they tell you to make a short approach after that, they can't do that. They have to give you the opportunity to adjust for the wake turbulence and to square your turn and adjust for the altitude and everything. So when exiting the runway after you land, the tower should provide you with a ground frequency unless those positions are combined. Sometimes ground and tower are combined together. Just clear the runway, clear the hold short bars, adjust your aircraft after landing, flaps and everything, and then give us a call on ground when you're ready to taxi in, and be ready, prepared to write a taxi instructions if you can. So listen for the runway exit instructions, and if you're unable to exit the runway at a assigned taxiway, let the tower know immediately that you have to extend or... Go ahead.
Just one quick question. You're coming into the center or approach, and it's happened, I guess. You never know when the handoff is going to be to the tower. All of a sudden, the airport's getting pretty big.
Yep.
So your question is, what the protocol is if you're talking to a center approach control and you're getting too close to the tower, what's the protocol? Just so for the recording.
So with that being said, the protocol is that you're not handed off to the tower. The tower knows that you're coming. They watch our tags. They see what's coming in. We have procedures that we develop with the tower so they can see our actual tags coming in. And we will tell you, we're responsible as approach controllers to make sure you're allowed into that airspace. It's not your responsibility. Once you talk to the approach controller is responsible for you to enter that airspace. Unless it's a Bravo, obviously. A Bravo, you have to be cleared into a Bravo.
Now, but was your question about getting too close to the airport? You wanted, and this is a controlled airport or an uncontrolled. Does it matter which one?
Well, it doesn't really matter, but it's a controlled airport.
A controlled airport.
And going on frequency to check data or whatever,
Well, as an approach control, if you're landing an airport with a Charlie or Bravo, you're required to let the approach controller know you have the ATIS. So they're going to query you as to whether or not you have the ATIS. And they're going to tell you, advise me when you have information, whatever it is. If it's a Delta, you're responsible to get that ATIS. So they're going to afford you, they're usually going to switch you in a timely manner for you to get the ATIS and to have a sufficient distance to then contact the tower. Right, exactly. Yeah, well, they usually let you go 10 to 15 miles out. And
So if I understand your question correctly, is that airport's getting really big. Basically, what I'm getting from you is you want me to admit that we do forget about aircraft on occasion. True statement. Maybe it could happen. I would not be upset if you did that.
And,
I don't forget, but this thing's getting big. Yeah. So.
and feel free to chime in. Feel free to call us. You know, just say something. We may be answering a landline. We may be talking to another controller next to us about something. We just may have forgotten.
Okay, so the question is, when you make your initial call, whether it's en route approach, how long do you wait to make your initial call? And
How long if you made the call and you're waiting for the reply?
So I'm sorry, say again. If you're waiting.
Say if you're Charlie Golf Victor Romeo Zulu with you.
Oh, Canadians.
Yeah.
I'm sorry. Go ahead. That was a long take.
There's no. How long do you wait for the reply?
Oh, a matter of.
You're making the initial call or you're checking in and I get no response.
Well, so one of the most important things is when you initially go onto that frequency, there better be a delay before you tee up. No, we need nothing more than when you tee up and then step on somebody, right? I would, 10, 15 seconds. It depends. I may be entering one of these clearances that he was talking about on a different frequency. Let's not be in a rush. I give it 10 to 15 seconds. Yeah. And we talk about those split frequencies too. That may be a case where you don't even realize you're stepping on somebody, but you are in our ear. Because, like, for example, some of the airspace has, you're working 5 frequencies, right? You're working across 2 states. So I'm transmitting, but you don't, somebody else is transmitting, but you don't know it because they're on the same bank of frequencies per se. So there's stuff like that too, where all of a sudden I have 2 aircraft in my ear instead of 1. Does that make sense? So just try again. I'd say 10, 15 seconds, and if you don't hear anything, keep back up.
And it's a good habit to listen to hear if you actually have the right frequency for the correct approach controller or center. It's very embarrassing to call the wrong person, especially when you call New York and it's actually Boston.
And then they call you alphabet when they
Yeah.
come back.
Yeah, absolutely.
All right, the next item is, what am I doing? Hear back, read back. So we'd like to see proper phraseology if we can. Phraseology is very important. We want to make sure the pilots are conversing with us, and the phraseology is nothing's gray. Everything's black and white. Hold short instructions, full readbacks with your call sign, please. Acknowledgement is required for any runway crossing, all runway crossings. Controllers expect readbacks in all clearances. And questions and mistakes, missing or incomplete readbacks lead to questions and sometimes mistakes. A full readback allows controllers to ensure that the pilot received the clearance as intended, and sometimes this is the only opportunity to catch and correct a mistake or misunderstanding. I would just clear, and when you feel you're comfortable to clear. When the aircraft is slowed to the speed you want to slow down to, clear in a safe manner. Don't overextend yourself and lose control of the aircraft just trying to make a taxiway. The controller is going to wait as you want to try and get off as soon as you can. As soon as it's safe for you to get off, yes. Because you might hear the person that's behind you, but there might be somebody that's behind you just about to check in. So phraseology back. Oh. I'm sorry, go ahead. Go back? Okay. Yep.
Okay. Okay, so The question was, the person asking has never done a hold short instruction, so is curious how that would go. I'll let Richard, our tower control. I'm the en route guy. I don't even know what a runway is. So,
two things about that before I give it to you. There are 3 times when a readback is required. When I give you a runway assignment, you call for taxi. I say taxi runway 28 left. You are required to read back runway 28 left. You are also required to read back all hold short instructions and anytime air traffic control requests. Those are 3 times you must read back. Now, the other times you have to acknowledge. We encourage you to read back always so we can confirm you got the right altitude, frequency, everything. So I want you to take that away, all right? But a readback would simply be, I would state the runway 28 left, or hold short runway 28 left at, and usually it's in an intersection. So hold short runway 28 left at Charlie 6. It is not sufficient enough to come back and say we'll hold at Charlie 6 or we'll hold short or anything like that. You've got to give me the entire thing with your call sign. Entire thing with your call sign. Okay? So if you're trying to get to a runway, okay, your assigned runway requires you to cross another runway. What is the procedure? Did I capture that question correctly?
So we're on the same runway.
Well, yes. However, there was so much confusion on that. The rule changed not that long ago. If I'm going to cross you across any runway, I must state cross runway so-and-so. And not only that, I can only give you the crossing. So I cannot say cross runway 28 right, runway 28 left cleared for takeoff. Remember that. We're going to talk about that in a couple slides.
Okay, so back to phraseology. Always use standard phraseology. If you have having any issues communicating, use plain language. If you want us to slow down our speech rate, just tell us to slow down. Use your full call sign initial contact. An abbreviated call sign is acceptable after that. And we will abbreviate your call sign also. Not using your call sign causes confusion and excess frequency transmissions. And if you are not 100% sure you have the correct clearance information, ask again. There are no good secrets in aviation. With that, I'm going to pass it on to Amanda about weather.
So in the interest of time, I'm going to go a little bit quickly through the weather section, but if you have any questions, please let me know. We also have a full weather briefing scheduled for Friday, and again, we have our forum schedules up here if you want to pick one up. So if you're intrigued by this little area, then you can see the full-blown presentation on Friday at 2:30. And after that, we'll be starting on emergencies, and we're also discussing that again tomorrow and Friday. So we'll go more in depth with those. So basically, weather is a key component in helping us complete the entire picture of what we're all trying to do, get from point A to point B safely. It's a team effort. We know that every aircraft out in the sky is susceptible to severe weather, which is constantly changing. We have no perfect weather detection system either on the ground or in the air. It takes all of it together along with PIREPs, which we'll cover, to give you and us the complete picture. The key here is getting us the information as quickly as possible, and vice versa. So how can we help you obtain a clearer weather picture? There's 2 slides on this. We can get PIREPs from other pilots in the area. It's an extra set of eyes in the sky. Somebody just went through an area that was projected to have severe thunderstorms, and it's clear and smooth. That pilot gives me a clear and smooth report, and you come along 5 minutes later and you have questions about it, I already know I can tell you that it's not exactly what was projected. And the opposite is true as well. So the big picture really is completed when we have these PIREPs along with our ATC weather information systems. Hazardous weather advisories are available on the center frequencies. We broadcast them as soon as they come through the system. Those include air mets, SIGMETs, convective SIGMETs, and center weather advisories. And those are always available on flight service and high WASP frequencies. And there's also National Weather Service forecasting available to you. So this slide actually is an example on the top right of what it looks like in the en route environment in the centers. We have a system that we can input the data that you give us, and this is basically set up this way based on our 7110 requirements. So if you're ever confused why we're asking for outside air temperature or whatever it is, it's all based on what our book tells us to do. So this gives you an idea of when we're required to solicit PIREPs from you. These are all the times. Ceilings at or below 5,000 feet, for an example. Any type of icing, light or greater, wind shear. And what do we need from you? Well, we know what time it is because you're telling us. If it's a couple minutes ago, please let us know so that we can make sure that the report is accurate. Where you were, if you're telling us it's happening right now, we can figure that out. If it was in the past, let us know. We know what type aircraft you are if we're already providing services. And if you're in a climb or a descent, let us know when it started, when it stopped, or if it's still continuing. And anytime there's icing involved, we need to know the type, the intensity, and the outside air temperature in Celsius so that we can get that information out to everyone else in the system. And really, before we move on to the emergency section, I just want to highlight how important these PIREPs are. Really, there's nothing more accurate than what's happening to you in the air right now. And it's so valuable for us to be able to tell the next person. I can't tell you how many times, so I work the airspace above the Sierra Nevada mountain range, and we constantly have turbulence. And aircraft after aircraft check on flying eastbound across that mountain range and want to know what's the ride like. And if they're at the same altitude as the next guy in front, I simply just ask that aircraft what they're experiencing right now, go back to the original request and tell them exactly who it was and where they are, same route of flight, same altitude, smooth, light chop, light turbulence, etc. So while we have forecasts available to us, they're not always accurate. While we have weather that we display in varying intensities on our radar scopes, and you have it on board in some cases, what's happening right now, real time, is really important to tell us. And like I said, that weather presentation will give you a lot more information if you want to join us later this week. So on to emergencies. So basically, this can happen to anyone at any time, quite a few different categories, but often immediate assistance or action is required. And for us to be able to help you, we really need to know what's going on immediately. As soon as you have an inkling that something may be amiss, please let us know. It's never too early to tell us, and we need to know what's happening from you to be able to make the right decision together on how we're going to progress for a safe outcome. And I believe it's up to Bob next.
Drive home. Yeah, and when it comes to the emergency, when it call us as soon as possible, and this means when, for example, let's say weather. You're flying along your VFR, and it's starting to get a little cloudy. You're feeling like this doesn't look right ahead. The visibility is starting to drop. And if you're not talking to ATC at that point, you don't have VFR flight following, it would be probably a good idea to get on a frequency and figure out what's ahead, right? So figure out what the weather looks like. If we have any PIREPs for IMC or VMC, stuff like that. A lot of times what we see is pilots will tend to call, especially in the VFR setting, once they're in the middle of an emergency, right? Once they're already in the clouds, stuck in the clouds, or they're stuck on top, or they're in really bad icing, when our options are less limited at that point. Whereas if the earlier you tell us something is wrong, the more options we have. So it's never too early to tell us that there's something wrong. I think it's a pride thing too. As a pilot myself, I know sometimes we don't want to admit, like, we've gotten in a little too deep. We've let things go a little too far. Sometimes it's something called survivor biases. So maybe last year you did something similar and you got away with it. So you're like, oh, I did it last time and I was fine and I can do it again. And this time you can't. There's all sorts of human factors that may cause you to think certain ways. But again, don't let your pride get in your way. If you need help, don't be afraid to ask us. That's what we're here for. Mayday, mayday, mayday. Who can declare emergency? Obviously, you can declare emergency. As the pilot in command, you can declare emergency. A lot of times, we will declare emergencies. For example, hypoxia. If you're hypoxic and you don't know what's going on, probably going to be pretty hard for you to declare an emergency, right? So we'll go ahead and we'll declare an emergency for you. Sometimes with icing, we see that too. Sometimes they don't want to admit that they're an emergency. We'll just go ahead and declare for you. And actually, the person responsible for the aircraft, the owner of the aircraft, or the operator of the aircraft can declare as well. A lot of people don't know that one, but they can declare. So let's say you go ahead and you do declare an emergency. What's going to happen? Well, first things first, we need to find out where you are if we're not talking to you, so we're going to have to radar identify you. If we are talking to you, then the next thing is you're going to be our highest priority. We're going to get the basics. What's going on in the air? What's wrong? How many people are on board the aircraft, and how much fuel do you have? The reason we ask about fuel is we need to know how long we have to deal with a situation. If you have 15 minutes of fuel on board, our options are very limited. If you have 2 hours of fuel on board, okay, we have more time to deal with the situation at hand. Same thing with people on board. We ask that for the obvious reason. If we lose contact with you, if you have to make a forced landing, we know how many people to go look for. We tell search and rescue. Once we do that, we need to find out the nature of the emergency, and then we can game plan from there. We're going to work together to figure out a solution, whether it's mechanical, weather-related, all those different factors. We're going to work with you to figure out a solution. Whether that be we call a pilot in. So if a controller's not a pilot, they may call in another pilot to help out. We may ask other aircraft with the frequency to give us information that we may need. Anything that we'll do to help you out of the situation. So, and again, that's a very basic overview of emergencies. And with Amanda said before, we do have emergency presentations throughout the week, which I highly recommend. We show a lot of videos of emergency situations throughout the year. And the last part is going to be kind of the longest part of this briefing. And the reason it's the longest is it's probably the most important right now, and probably the biggest thing happening in the National Airspace System is wrong surface landings. So what is a wrong surface landing? Anyone want to take a guess what a wrong surface landing is? What do you think it is? Land on the wrong runway, right? So yeah. A water... Okay, yeah, you could land on a water runway, land on a water runway. What about, did you ever watch the news and you ever see the Southwest aircraft that was supposed to go to Branson, land at another airport? Definitely landed on the wrong surface, right? That runway was not the airport, it wasn't the runway at Branson, it was the runway at a different airport. Same thing, I'm sure you've seen the news recently too. We had an aircraft that almost landed on a taxiway. Again, if you're supposed to land on a runway, and you land on a taxiway, that's a wrong surface landing. Now, the reason why that we're really concerned about this is the amount that's happening is skyrocketing at a very scary pace about wrong surface landings. So in 2016 alone, there was 114 wrong surface landings. And that may not seem a lot, but you're getting close to one every other day at that point. And one of the things about that, too, is in 2016, 80% were Part 91, which is pretty much GA aircraft. Now, you may be thinking, well, Bob, I'm a good pilot. I don't land on wrong airports. I'm too good for that. It's those dumb pilots. Well, I'm going to tell you this. Not only is it GA this happens to commercial airliners who are landing on wrong surfaces. Most recently, has anyone heard of an actor? He was in some Wars movie, Star Wars.
I don't know. Apparently, he's an experienced pilot.
Yeah, I think his name is Harrison Ford. Do you guys remember that? We'll play a little video from that, but it's even experienced pilots can land on wrong surface. Volume for that?
Can we get some volume?
Need some audio for the computer, maybe.
Overnight, NBC News obtained
Maybe
video
not.
of the moment
We can at
Harrison
least see the
Ford
video if we can't get the audio to
Lewis
work.
Single-engine plane over a 737 filled with passengers. It happened 2 weeks ago at John Wayne Airport in Orange County, California. From another angle, you can see Ford's yellow Husky coming dangerously close to an American Airlines flight preparing to take off with 116 people on board.
Can we get a little more volume on that?
Cleared to land on a short runway, but instead, as you can see here in the distance, he mistakenly landed on a parallel taxiway where planes taxi before takeoff. Experts say that is a clear FAA violation. Once on the ground, Ford radioed air traffic control. Was that airliner meant to be underneath me? The controller told Ford he hadn't landed on the runway. Instead, you landed on taxiway C.
Taxiway Charlie, but we'll give him a break. But like I said, I mean, Harrison Ford is a great guy. Very experienced pilot. Like me, fixed wing and helicopter. I mean, I don't want to brag, but Harrison and I have a lot in common. So, it's cool. Whatever. I don't want to brag, but it's kind of a big deal. But even the most experienced pilots, including commercial pilots and airline pilots, are having this issue right now. There's 66 wrong surface landings in FY 2016. And you can see, if you look at the graph here, what happened, and we're still trying to figure out why, to be quite honest with you, is it was hovering around an average of 15, dropped a little bit, and has now since skyrocketed and stayed on that same trajectory for 2017. And again, 9 of those were runways, 8 were taxiways, 9 were airports. So example, wrong runway may be you're clear to land runway 28 left, you land 28 right. Wrong taxiway may be you're clear to land runway 28 right and land on taxiway Charlie. Wrong airport. You're cleared to land at Branson, landed at the airport next to Branson. I don't know the airports down there. I'm not familiar with Branson. Not my cup of tea, I'm sure, but it's a wonderful place. Now, keep this in mind. So if you look at the 2016 totals, we had 36, 27, 9, and then you look at our 2017 totals, and that's just through March. So 9, 7, and 2, we're on pace right now to probably, if not double, get close to triple where we're at in 2016 when it comes to wrong surface landings. So this is a really big deal that we're trying to get a grasp on first, and then try to get out to the GA community and the whole aviation community as a whole that this is a problem and something that needs to be addressed. And with that, I think I will hand off to Richard, and he will take us to the home stretch.
All right. So let's talk about the top 3 causes why this happens. Number 1, cognitive biases. What is that? I'll describe that one in a second. So hold on to that. Number 2, view from the tower or from the cockpit. And number 3, loss of situational awareness. I want to start with number 2, if that's okay. Of course it is, because I'm giving the presentation. So let's start with number 2. All right. Number 2, controller view or pilot view. All right. I was talking with Ron about this. Ron works in the center. And we were talking about the incident that he referred to earlier in San Francisco, where a heavy Air Canada aircraft, a professional flight crew, nearly landed on 4 of their aircraft. How on God's green earth does that happen? And you could excuse it. You could say, well, it's just that flight crew. That's a bad flight crew. They didn't have control of their flight deck. But look at the numbers he just presented, and I humbly submit to you, it's not an individual problem. Maybe there's some human factors going on here. Maybe there's something else going on, including but not limited to the controllers. Where were the controllers during these incidents? Isn't that their job? Well, understand, we have some challenges to us. I'm going to show you a video here in a little bit, all right, where an aircraft departs off a taxiway instead of the runway. That threshold is 2 miles from the tower. From that angle, it is nearly impossible to see an aircraft that is 500 feet to the right or to the left 2 miles away. It's a little easier the bigger the aircraft, but the smaller the aircraft, you know how easy it is to lose you people in the lights? The tower height, weather phenomena. I'm going to let that one rest just for a second because that also applies to pilots, and you'll see why here in a second. Obstructed line of sight. Do you realize Denver, great airport. Anybody flown in there? You did? Was that a wrong surface? Did you intend to? You did. Okay. All right. Good. So Denver, those runways are so long that it is easy to lose jets, the smaller ones, in the the troughs of that runway. All right. It ain't nice and flat. Okay. This is mountainous terrain we're talking about. Not that mountainous out there, but they will actually lose aircraft in these troughs. True story. Breakdown in scan. All right. Again, that's some human factor stuff. We'll visit that in a second. Let's talk about the pilot's point of view, can we? Number 1, airports with the same runway alignment. Do we have any of those? Holy smokes. Once you start looking at this, you'll be astounded at how many there are, okay? Airports between the pilot's current location and destination. So you're on a visual approach, you call the runway in sight or the airport in sight. And the controller says, clear for the visual. Except that there's something between you and them. How easy is it to land on that? I'm going to show you here in a second. Weather phenomena. I brought that one back up, okay? So let's visit that one while we're at it.
Continental Flight 203 was on a routine flight from Houston Intercontinental to Corpus Christi International. Visibility was 5 to 6 miles. At 2,000 feet, a cloud layer was obscuring the flight crew's view. Flight 203 was cleared for a localizer approach to runway 31 at Corpus Christi. The glide slope was out of service. The flight intercepted the localizer for runway 31. The captain saw a runway at the edge of the clouds was cleared for a visual approach and said, "Let's land." The autopilot was disengaged and they began a visual descent to a safe landing. At the wrong airport.
Can you see how weather phenomena might affect that? That is a true story, all right? Continental landed. I have to be careful when I say this. I'm from Oregon. Certain things are legal. At Cabinus Airport instead of Corpus Christi, okay? Weather phenomena. It's very difficult in the tower to see you at certain points, in certain directions, certain sunset. Anybody been traveling down the road, okay? Your windshield, slightly dirty. It's got dust on it. And you're traveling right into the sun, all right? It's a free-for-all, let's admit it. All right, you're letting God take the wheel at that point. Are we not? Right? So imagine an aircraft turning into that on the taxiway. Oh, apparently they agree. Okay, so now let's talk about the second cause, controller cognitive biases. What are cognitive biases? Do you realize there are hundreds of different types of cognitive biases? The one we're most common with is called expectation bias. Now you may be saying, Richard, this is all fluff. Sounds very academic to me. I don't think it really applies to me. I'm going to show you that it does, all right? But let's talk about controllers first. I assume that you have a certain amount of experience. I assume that you have the charts on board and that I can give you a taxi route and that you'll follow it. If you don't help me out and say, I'm a student pilot, how am I going to know? By the way, I was talking with one gentleman here yesterday. He said, wherever I go somewhere new, I just tell them I'm a student pilot. They take great care of me. The good book does not condone lying. But in this case, I'm going to give him a pass. Pilot misunderstands the layout of the airport. Listen, we got some pretty complex airports out there, do we not? And accurate and complete communication. Oh, this communication thing, this one's so big. If you were in our last one, we talked about it. Anybody in there? Oh, yeah, you missed a great presentation because I did it. Accurate and complete communication between, you know, somebody said that, do I have it in there? I don't think I do. Somebody once said the greatest, it was George Bernard Shaw, an Irish playwright actually, he said the greatest, I'm actually going to finish this quote here in a second. He said the greatest tragedy in communication is the illusion that it's actually happened. Right? Because we can throw the words, all you married guys, you know what I'm talking about. You throw the words out there and you assume that communication has taken place, right? Oh, no. Get a read back when you're at home. That's what I do. All right? Now, let's talk about pilot cognitive biases. Anybody familiar with this airport over here? Look at that. That's Seattle-Tacoma Airport. Great little airport, except that it's a bugger for, it's a setup, basically. Somebody lands the wrong runway here, I don't even blame them. Don't blame them. Why? Because look at this. If you're the pilot, do you not expect the widest, longest, brightest piece of pavement to be the runway? But at Seattle-Tacoma Airport, that is the taxiway. Half of you would have just landed on it. But I don't judge. Pilots read back the amended clearance. So, for example, you first checked on with ATC. Bob told you expect runway 28 left at Portland. Now you get handed to another controller and they said, clear for the visual approach runway 28 right. You got 28 left on the mind, right down to the surface, right? Very easy to do. And last but not least, pilots expect the longest, brightest, widest surface to be the intended runway. Okay, so you can see that now all of a sudden it becomes a human factors thing, right? I think one of the worst things we ever did, when we close a runway at night, we turn off the lights. Why? We don't want people landing on that thing, so we turn the lights off, right? So you got a big black hole, and it's usually flanked by 2 pieces of pavement. And the pilots come in, well, he's not going to land on the black hole, so he's going to land on one of the other 2 pieces of pavement right next to it. It's kind of a setup, quite frankly. Now, I have no statistics or anything. It's a theory I'm working on. I'll get back to you next year. Here we go. You said you don't have cognitive biases. Dang, I'm a slide early. So let me prove that you do. Let's talk about this, how this happens, all right? So you see, hear, and interpret. There is so much stimuli coming into your system every second, you can't possibly process it all. It's a survival thing, you realize? Your mind fills in a lot of blanks because it can't possibly process it all. So your mind draws on past experience that Bob was talking about. Hey, this worked last week. It's going to work this week, right? So your mind draws on these experiences, and it fills in a lot of blanks, okay? And then what it does is it creates a story. From that story, whatever's going on in your mind, you create feelings and emotions. And from that, that's how you're going to make your decision-making process. That's just the normal thing. That's not me saying it. That's academic. So, all right? So greater people, minds than mine said that, all right? Now, let's talk about, well, what happens if that goes wrong? I told you that you could fill in the blanks, right? That your mind is going to draw on past experience. Which is what your mind is doing right now as you read that, right? And you said you didn't have any biases. Shame on you. But you can read the whole thing. If it was on the screen, you could read that whole thing, right? Why? Because your mind is filling in the blanks, all right? You are drawing on some past experience. You're all very good readers here, and therefore your mind allows you to read that, even though it should make no sense whatsoever. That's a cognitive bias, okay? Now, so your mind's filling in the blanks. Is there a chance? Is there the possibility that that goes wrong? And if that goes wrong, what are the consequences? Now, you're all pilots. Let's say you start out at point A, and you're intended to go to point B, and you're just a slight 5 degrees off. What's 5 degrees among friends? Well, a mile from the starting point, not much. What is it 50 miles from the starting point? See, if you start with that small error, what does that do to you? Don't believe me? Watch this.
Hey, kid. You got it. Yeah. Come on.
Bad kitty, bad kitty.
There's a fractured fibula. Given him mild sedative, so he could be able to go on tomorrow.
Daddy's gonna be so excited.
That killed him.
Paging Dr. Weather. It's going to be a beautiful sunny day today, and we can expect much more of the same over the next couple.
I don't hate your mother. Morning, Bev.
Look at the cute dog.
You thought you knew the story, but you had that one little piece of information that might have been off, correct? So our first anecdote to the cognitive biases, don't judge too quickly. Don't be too quick in your judgments. Number 2, heightened awareness. Check and then check again. Anybody remember a crash in Lexington? About 2007. What a tragedy. I think the biggest tragedy is if we don't learn from other people's mistakes. I think that's where it gets really tragic, all right? We don't know exactly what went on the flight deck, but we can suspect that they never set that heading bug as they were required to do, or they may have caught the fact that they were taken off on the wrong runway, okay? Now, sometimes you do the heading bug, but there are other cues, there are other indicators that you might be about to land or depart on the wrong runway. Can you start it?
After dark on a weekday in late November 2016, .com 4193 contacted ground control to request taxi for departure. Ground control issued instructions to runway 15 left via taxiways Whiskey Bravo and Whiskey Victor. The pilot read the instructions back correctly.
Okay, we have kilo, so we're going to do 15 left, and we taxi on Whiskey Bravo, hold short of Whiskey, call for .com 43.
Parallel to the runway, another taxiway, Whiskey Alpha, had a section closed for repair. Unfortunately, unnoticed by ATC, .com 4193 lined up on Whiskey Alpha and took off. A short time later, another pilot brought it to ATC's attention.
That B just took off. What did he just do?
What did he just do about what?
You sure he went off 15 left?
And yes, he took off one side left.
The errant .com 4193 hit 2 barricades as it rotated, leaving tire marks, but making it successfully into the air. Personnel working near taxiway Whiskey Alpha made it successfully home that night. What could have been done to increase the situational awareness on the part of the pilot and ATC?
What can you do on your flight deck to increase the situational awareness? I hope you caught the fact that they left 2 tire marks on those barricades. By the way, those were 2-foot barricades because the airport happened to be out of the 5-foot ones. This was last year, a professional flight crew. So again, in talking with Ron here, with how on God's green earth can they line up on a taxiway with blue lights? I didn't get to speak to this flight crew. I would like to, okay? But they're not the only ones. Again, Air Canada did the same thing last week, okay? So there must be something to it. Check, cross-check, as we said here. All right, eliminate distractions. Let's talk about distractions here for a second. Remember, Bob said that, is Bob, it took me a second. Bob over there, I've only been working with him all day. Bob over there said that Harrison Ford is a good pilot, right? By Harrison Ford's own admission, he was distracted. You know what he was distracted by? You say, well, texting. He was probably texting. That's a sin. It should be, but it's not. All right. What was he distracted by? Wake turbulence. He had been given a wake turbulence advisory, and unlike Bob, he did not want to get that close of a look at a DC-9. So he was trying to maneuver around the wake turbulence, and in so doing, became distracted, and he landed on a taxiway. So even trying to do the right thing, okay, we have to be aware that we can get distracted. So try and avoid wake turbulence. Anybody flown with a passenger, maybe an animal or something like that. But passengers, oh, I mean, they're needy, right? They just need this, need that, right? Anybody ever heard of stereo cockpit? I think did I have an airline pilot over here? Sir, were you an airline pilot at one time? Okay. But you landed in Denver, right? Okay, fantastic, even better. So did you have a stereo cockpit procedure? What did that mean? Below a certain altitude, usually with the airlines it's 10,000 feet. The only thing you're doing is you're running checklists. You're talking operational stuff. You're not talking about the weather, sports, or anything else. Stereo cockpit. Can I suggest that in your flight deck, on your Cherokee or Cessna or whatnot, what if you had a stereo flight deck? Oh, it may not be 10,000 feet, but maybe it's below 2,000 feet. You have a stereo cockpit where the only thing we're talking about is anything that's operational. We are concentrating, we're focused, we're not going to allow ourselves to be distracted. food for thought, all right? So this is just scratching the surface, by the way. This is not a comprehensive list. There are a lot of distractions out there, but that'll just give you an idea, okay? Avoid distractions. So again, to recap, don't judge too quickly. Heighten your awareness. Check and then check again. We're going to eliminate distractions. We're also going to be acknowledge the fact that we could be wrong. Confident versus cocky. Cockiness leads to complacency. Gordon Graham is a safety risk expert. Spent 33 years in the Highway Patrol in California. Now he's a risk management expert and runs a company that consults worldwide. And according to him, we need confident people in aviation. We need confident people. What we do not need are cocky people. There's a big difference. Because according to him, quote, cocky people are a problem lying in wait, close quote. I'll suggest to you that cocky might mean those people that say, cognitive bias, don't affect me. Distractions, never had one, okay? That sort of thing. Cockiness leads to complacency. Now let's talk about this complacency thing for a second. Sir, in the hat there, how many total hours do you have?
Only about
16,000. 16,000. Well, I got to wrap my mind around that. That's a lot of hours. May I suggest to you that the first time you flew, it was just as risky as the last time you flew. See, the actual event doesn't get less risky. Oh, you get much better at it. But the fact is, you're still flying. Flying has some inherent risk. That risk does not go away just because you've done it over and over and over. That's the problem with cockiness. It leads to complacency. Sir, did you run checklists the last time just as much as you did the first time? Okay, so there were no checklists, folks. You teach checklists, all right? Okay, so, well, but come on, with 16,000 hours, you got to be pretty good. You don't need a checklist. Quote that. I'm putting that on a T-shirt right there. You'll see that on sale here next year. Because why? You don't get complacent, right? Complacency kills. Oh, that's good too. I'll put that on the front and the other on the back. All right, let's talk about this complacency. Complacency contributes to wrong surface landings when tasks become routine. Don't let it become routine. Flying cannot become routine. Number two, pilot becomes overconfident. I would love it if you'd leave here using the word hubris. It basically means cockiness, right? Don't display hubris. And number three, there's a reduced awareness of the danger. You have to respect that flying has a certain inherent danger. No matter how much you do it, it has an inherent danger associated with it. But those dangers can be overcome, okay? Now, let's keep going. I like this quote before we do. The danger of success is complacency. It comes in two forms, arrogance and inflexibility. Arrogance and inflexibility. I think arrogant people are ones that don't use checklists, that sort of thing. It makes me really nervous. And next year, if I get to come back, I think we're going to be able to show you a video that will blow your mind. Okay? But how many of you have been in a cockpit with somebody at the controls that might be a little arrogant? How's that comfortable for you? I feel a little nervous myself. By the way, it's not Bob. Bob's a great one. Okay, flexibility. I want to talk about this flexibility. You have to be open and acknowledge that you might be wrong. Because if you depart from point A, like we said, point A to point B, right? And you refuse to admit along the route that you could be wrong, you're not cross-checking, rechecking, right? Then you're going to wind up in the wrong spot. I think this video highlights that. If we can show that, please.
Again, this is the USS Montana requesting that you immediately divert your course 15 degrees to the north to avoid a collision. Over.
Please divert your course 15 degrees to the south to avoid collision.
This is Captain Hancock. You will divert your course. Over.
Negative, Captain. I'm not moving anything. Change your course. Over.
Sir, this is the USS Montana, the second largest vessel in the North Atlantic Fleet. You will change course 15 degrees north, or I will be forced to take measures to ensure the safety of this ship. Over.
This is a lighthouse, mate. It's your call. Hello, Captain? I think he's gone. Fair enough.
Flexibility, right? Be open to allowing ATC and other entities to help you out, okay? I'm trying to move this along in the interest of time. So I want to play you one last video. Bob gave you a stat right at the beginning. How many of it is part 91? How much of it is part 121? These wrong surface operations that we have. And again, you say, well, I mean, these flight crews, maybe they weren't as serious as I am on my flight deck, etc. But they are. And I want to highlight that with one more video, if you will. I went too far. I apologize. I'm going to back up for you there, and then you can play that. Now, I want to set this up, and actually I want to ask Ron to set this up, if you can hand him the microphone. Ron, we're going to show this. Can you describe this approach very briefly?
All right, to be brief. This approach is not an actual circling approach, but it's a ILS to runway 15 right at Boston with a visual left transition to runway 4 left. And basically what they do is they come down the ILS 15 right. The tower asks them if they have the airport in sight. Once the pilot calls the airport in sight, they tell them, join the, circle, enter the left base to runway 4 left over the harbor, and they fly over the harbor of Boston, turn left, and land runway 4 left. The tower maintains visual separation from the aircraft landing 4 left, while aircraft is still landing runway 4 right. So this is what you're going to see. That's why this aircraft is coming at an unusual angle to the runway, and this is happens in the day and the nighttime.
And that aircraft is an SR-22, and it's lined up for the taxiway, not the runway right now.
Yeah. Yeah.
6 Bravo Juliet, go around. 6 Bravo Juliet, go around, please, go around. 6 Bravo Juliet, going around.
So this Cirrus right here just lined up for a taxiway instead of runway 4 left at Boston, coming in on this slightly askew angle that Ron was talking about. Okay, so that happened in 2014.
That was you were lined up for a taxiway, 6 Bravo Juliet. Fly runway heading and climb maintain. Are you on a VFR or IFR flight? We're IFR, sir. Okay, climb maintain. For now, just maintain 2,000. I'll check with approach, see if I can bring it right back around. 2,000, 6 Bravo Juliet.
Now this is 2017. This is a professional flight crew. This is a Piedmont Dash 8.
Piedmont 4872, landing light still appears off. Yep, go on now. Yeah, 4072, go around now, go around. They're going around. 4072, climb maintain 3,000. 2,000, 4072. JetBlue 65 on Echo, cross runway 4 left, taxi via Mike. JetBlue 65, cross runway 4 left, taxi via Mike.
JetBlue 865, cross at runway 4 left, via Mike.
PM 4872, turn left heading 020, maintain 3.
So we have exact same piece of pavement. We got a Cirrus and a
4072, go around now, go around.
They're going around.
Okay, that's enough death and destruction for today. So it was brought to my attention. I thought I had till 5:15. I apologize. I kept you here a little bit longer. All right. So I'm going to wrap this up. Some other contributing factors to wrong surface landing, what you see there, but I wanted to address the top 3 causes there. All right. I'm going to leave it at that and invite you any questions. Now, before you go, let me say this before we dive into the questions. We have forms here that describe where our booth is. Come by, have donuts with us 8:30 in the morning, 8:39, they'll probably be gone, so be on time. For all you coffee drinkers, we have some of that too. I prefer chocolate milk, but I don't judge. And then we have these great little tools, these assets right here that deal with different subjects. Notice it's the size of your lap board. Huh? I'm looking out for you. And you pick those up too. Great information on those. And then last but not least, the wings credits are right here. If you want to get credit, fill this form out and put it right there. Now, you're free to move about. Anybody who has a question, we're willing to entertain those.